Welcome to Cyber Focus from the McCrary Institute, where we explore the people and ideas shaping and defending our digital world. I'm your host, Frank Cilluffo, and this week I have the privilege to sit down with John Katko. John was a serious, strong, and major voice on cybersecurity issues on Capitol Hill. Former ranking member of the House Homeland Security Committee, previously was in leadership positions on both the Cyber Subcommittee and the Aviation Security Subcommittee. Prior to coming to Capitol Hill, he was an assistant U.S. attorney working organized crime cases and was a big loss for Washington when he moved out of the Hill, but is a big voice still today as a member and as a senior fellow with the McCrary Institute. So really excited to sit down with John. And John, great to see you today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so I thought maybe we'd start with a little bit of level setting.
Sure.
and sort of when you went in to your roles on Capitol Hill and where the cybersecurity landscape was then.
Sure.
Versus where it is today.
Yeah, I mean, when I first got into Congress, I had just come off being 20 years as an organized crime prosecutor. And in that capacity, we also dealt with the joint terrorism task forces all over the country and all over the world, for that matter. And it was clear the threat when I first got to Congress, greatest threat was from homegrown acts of terrorism inspired by ISIS. Mm-hmm. And ISIS was running strong then, and there was a lot of major incidents in the U.S. And so when I went to Congress, I was on a TSA subcommittee for 2 terms. And I was there because there was a healthy desire by ISIS to take out more planes. Mm-hmm. And we interrupted a lot of incidents, and there was a lot of legislation around it. But during that 4 years, things really started gravitating very quickly towards cyber and cyber attacks. And by the end of my second term, it was quite clear that cyber was the focus. So I went to head up the Cybersecurity Subcommittee for 2 years, and then I ended up taking over the Homeland Security Committee for Republicans. And by the time I left Congress, cyber was the preeminent threat to the United States, bar none. Mm-hmm. It's not to say that ISIS isn't a threat. It's not to say that Al-Qaeda...
It is coming back a little bit.
It is coming back a little, but the quintessential and ubiquitous threat to our country's homeland is absolutely cyber. And that focused a lot of our attention on what to do about it. And we can talk about that if you want, about the legislation and how we form CISA and all that.
Yeah, I'd love to, because you played an integral role, a central role in the standing up of CISA, morphing from the NPPD, and I don't even remember what the acronym stands for, National Prevention and Protection Directive. I don't even remember. But
it's in a rearview mirror, so don't worry
exactly.
about it.
It is in a rearview mirror, and for good reason. Yeah. But you and another friend of mine, Mike McCall, were very integral into that. And then you also had major roles in terms of enhancing CISA's capability. So let's look back at the tape.
I'll give you a little bit of historical perspective, because I think it's important. John Ratcliffe and McCall and some of those others were really instrumental in the CISA legislation. And we all believed that we needed an agency within the Homeland Security umbrella that was like the center field or quarterback, if you will, of the cybersecurity apparatus in federal government. And we can talk more about where it is now. Let's talk about what we did to stand it up. So we stood it up, and our goal was always to make it a very significant and robust place for cybersecurity. And so we passed legislation to do that. And by the time it was up and running, I'd end up taking a more senior role within the committee and then taking over the committee. And I quickly realized that not only was CISA an extremely important part of legislation to stand up, we had to be properly funded. Mm-hmm. And we had to spend a lot of time and a lot of effort getting the funding that it needed. And Benny Thompson was a very good partner on the Democratic side. He was terrific about making sure that we had the funding for CISA. And it's a $2.5–3 billion agency now, and it needs to be a lot more resource-wise. So standing it up and then funding it and then making sure we're attracting the right people there. So as you all well knew, and everybody in the cyber realm knows, manpower is such a critical problem that attracting talent and keeping that talent is very hard, especially on a government salary. Mm-hmm. So we tried creative things to get up the talent. But we've got terrific leaders. We had Chris Krebs, who stood it up and did a
Who I
great
spoke
job.
to today, and he said hello,
He's
by
a man.
the way.
He's a man. He's always got better hair than me, but
He's
it's
in the
okay.
UK, but all good.
And then, and then working with Jen Easterly now, she's been terrific. And they care about the mission deeply and care about keeping our country safe. So as CISA got its feet under him and was starting to establish itself within the agency, then we started realizing that information flow is critically important. And that led to the CIRCIA legislation, which I really championed. And we got it across the finish line. It was a lot of fits and starts, but we got it done. And the CIRCIA legislation, to me, is one of the most important pieces of cybersecurity legislation we've ever done. And I say that because it's going to mandate, when it's up and running, that incidents, once it reaches a certain level, are reported to CISA in a timely manner. You strip out all the identifying information, just give us the malware and the information we need. What CISA has to do is make that information actionable to this public, get it back out in a timely manner. And they're working on that, and I think they're going to do a good job with that. And that was really important for us because I think that understanding the nature and complexity of the threat, we've had Log4j, we've had all these other threats like SolarWinds and so many others, Colonial Pipeline, that they're coming fast and furious.
And I'm going to pull the thread a little further in a second on CIRCIA and whether congressional intent is being met and harmonization of various regulations that are across the board. But before we go there, how would you grade CISA today?
I think CISA is doing a terrific job. I'd give them an A, given the circumstances under which you're operating. A very woefully inadequate budget and trying to get the talent they need to get. And quite frankly, the other portion of it is the incessant turf battles that go on, right? So when we formulated...
None of those, right?
Right. So when we formulated CISA, we envisioned that to be the quarterback, if you will, in the cybersecurity team, right? And we envisioned the Department of Defense having the offensive and defensive capabilities, right? Offensive and defensive teams. And you have NSA being special teams, to use a sports euphemism. And then we realized we were lacking with a cyber director, so we encouraged the administration to reinstitute a cyber director. And Inglis was terrific, but I think Inglis would admit, or others will say, he didn't have the authority he should have had as a head coach.
He said as much on this on the show.
And the problem with that is that you have people throwing elbows, in a different turf, and that's not good. We should all be on the same team, and it's not like anyone's anti-American, but people are loath to give up the turf, right? And so making that, smoothing that out is an important part of it. And I think one of the things we need to do is to give that ONCD, excuse me, my old drug days, ONCD director more authority.
Counter drugs, I would
right,
say.
Exactly. But more authority and a better line of communication to the president. He should be the center fielder / coach who sees all those different things, the special teams, offensive, defense, CISA, and says, and State Department and all the other things, too many people are getting into president's ear. You need to have someone that can sift it all out and give it to the president and see the entire landscape, not just an individual's personal turf. And that's what I envision. That's what we need to do. So I would give our overall cybersecurity structure a B, maybe. But I would give CISA, what they're doing under the circumstances with which you're doing it, I'd give them an A.
Awesome. And I love the way you did frame the National Cyber Director, which was a big priority of ours at the Solarium Commission.
Yes, it was.
And
we listened to you.
Yeah, which is great. I just hope Congress continues to listen, and we'll get into that in a second. But the way you framed it, I think, is really good, because you needed someone who can get into the headphones of both the offensive and the defensive coordinator of a team. And one of the things that I think makes CISA unique is that FBI has a critical mission, but it's a very focused investigatory law enforcement mission. NSA has a critical mission, but it's primarily and almost exclusively focused overseas, that there wasn't, and other entities had regulatory roles that weren't necessarily going to be trusted by the private sector, which is essential. They're frontline warriors in this industry.
Right. If you look at it this way, like to your point, FBI wanted to have the CIRCIA legislation, have the reporting going right to them all the incidents. Like, they're law enforcement. It's a different.
It would scare
animal.
Potentially.
Yes, and so we had if you had a stronger ONCD authority, they could have tamped that down a lot quicker than we did. We were able to tamp it down, but that's kind of the things I'm talking about. That's why you need a strong central person there to oversee everything and properly advise the president.
Awesome. Let's go to your former home, Capitol Hill, and lots of developments right now, obviously, in lots of different areas. But before we sort of jump into CIRCIA and what its implications are and congressional intent and any impact you think overturning of Chevron Deference may have. Overall, how do you feel Congress is doing? Since you're putting on your professorial hat and giving grades, how would you grade Congress?
I think they're doing pretty well. I don't know what grade I would give them, but I think they understand the promise and the threat that AI is, for example. I mean, when Schumer comes out and says he wants to dedicate like $32 billion to it, it's clear to me that he understands that it's a problem. Now, whether we should donate or designate that much money towards, I don't know. But the bottom line is trying to get a grip on the complexity and the promise and the problem that AI creates. They understand that. And kudos to Congress for understanding that they really don't know what the heck it is, and that scares them. That's a good thing. Right? I do think that at times they have a misguided view of CISA, and I think some of it's politically motivated, from back in it, when the previous head of CISA said that the 2020 election was secure. Well, it was. Whether you like it or not, it was. And I think that's kind of cast a pall over CISA a little bit in some circles, but I think that's diminishing now. And I think people understand we need a strong CISA, and we need a CISA that's going to be very effective going forward.
So who are some so big loss. When you left, it happened to be the same time that Congressman Jim Langevin left and a friend, and Senator Sass left. Those were some big, that's sort of like Hall of Famers going off.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't know if I was at the level of those two, but
absolutely
we worked very well together, and that was, and we understood
now
how
we lost
important
Mike Gallagher. So who are the bright lights?
I made Andrew Garbarino head of the Cybersecurity Subcommittee.
I just had the privilege to testify before him recently.
And he gets it. His staff gets it, and I'm very hopeful and happy for him because he understands the priority that it is, and he's a very good advocate. And more importantly, he's a very good listener to the people in the know that go to talk to him. He listens. And I think Congressman or Senator Peters is great on the Senate side. I think Laura Lee, keep an eye on her coming up.
Agree.
She's very good on it. Nancy Mace at times seems to show a propensity for it. And somebody that I would look at that just took over a position from Congressman Joyce. Joyce was a bad loss leaving the Appropriations Subcommittee for Homeland because he understood the cyber stuff very well. But I think Amadeus is going to be a willing partner, and he's going to listen and he's going to learn because he wants to get things done. So I think those are some of them. I think there's more, but there's some there that are very interested in it, and that's encouraging going forward.
And first time I testified, it was the Senate in the early 90s on cyber. A lot of members didn't have email, and certainly these weren't available back then.
They weren't a blessing and curse at the RNL, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure it is a blessing, that's for sure. But the truth is now you do have members coming in that are at least familiar with technology, and I remember briefings in the White House where you'd have all the cyber people sort of treated as a very dark black magic because they didn't want to share exactly, and quite honestly, we didn't have the empirical evidence, and we weren't as dependent back then. So I do think we're starting to see some change, but it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work, and some of this isn't sexy. It's blocking, tackling, and legislating, and that leads us into sort of Chevron Deference, which I think could have significant implications for legislation going forward, yes?
I think the Chevron decision is going to have a huge impact. And one of the things that always troubled me when I was on in the House was the I don't want to say the institutional arrogance, but the
you said it.
Well, let's say it. That's what it is.
Yeah,
that is it. The institutional arrogance of these agencies. I mean, my father-in-law, I'll give you an example. My father-in-law was a farmer for Frito-Lay for his whole life.
Oh, wow.
Right? He grew up on his farm, and he made it into a great business. And he was being told, and he's hundreds of miles from huge water sources, that mud puddles on his farm were part of the waters of the United States because that's what EPA said in rulemaking.
Wow.
And it completely blew, it goes outside the realm of the law, in my opinion. So I was always like a little nervous about that. And then something happened right after I left that, to me, really put a fine point on it, and that was the SEC. We just passed the CIRCIA legislation, and it was very clear that we wanted an apparatus with the federal government that was reporting requirements for major incidents. We worked very much with all the stakeholders, and then the SEC just decides to jump the gun and institute their own rules on that. And that is a great example of, I think, administrative overreach. And that was the genesis of overturning Chevron, that type of action. And I know it was about some fishermen who overturned a rule, but that SEC action was unnecessary, and it was not team play, and it was just not smart, in my opinion. So now you got to try and meld what the SEC is doing with what CISA's mandate is by law. So overturning Chevron is going to have a profound effect on that. And it's going to make legislators have to be legislators. These knuckleheads up on Capitol Hill who don't ever pass a bill have got to roll up their sleeves and do some work.
Yeah.
And I'm encouraged to hear that they want to increase the staffs, and they want to get more specialists and that actually have more prescriptive legislative laws that they create. And that's a good thing, because we're the legislative branch. We're supposed to tell the executive branch, here's what to do and here's your parameters. And we haven't done a good job of that.
And obviously the American people's voice is through Congress, which I think is going to require less. Some pieces of legislation you can ride a Mack truck through, and obviously you need to have some role where the executive agencies and branches can have some interpretation. Commanders attend to equivalent in the military, but I think it will require, at a time where arguably the two ends of Pennsylvania Avenue are going in opposite directions, to do this right for the American people, it's going to require them to have to come together a little more, isn't it? It
is, and it's going to have to require more thinking on Capitol Hill and more doing.
And more purple
let's face it,
too,
we don't have, it doesn't seem like we have a desire much anymore to legislate. It's all about pontificating and fighting. I mean, you can go up on Capitol Hill and find a ton
quickest soundbite, right?
Find a couple members, a ton of members who have never passed a law. I mean, that's unbelievable to me. That's our bread and butter, what we're supposed to do. And we got to get back to legislating. We got to get back to controlling the power of the purse, and we got to get back to being the people that tell the executive branch what to do instead of the other way around.
And since you brought up CIRCIA and you brought up Andy Garbarino and talking about CISA, he seems to think that congressional intent isn't necessarily being met out there. What are your thoughts?
I totally agree. And obviously, like what I said with the Securities and Exchange Commission, that's for sure. But so he's right. But let's take a little deeper dive on CIRCIA, right? You already have an agency that's overwhelmed in CISA, right? And now they're taking on the gargantuan task of being able to digest and then make actionable intel out of that digestion back to the public in a fast and efficient manner with a staff that's probably already overwhelmed. So we've got to do something about that, in my opinion. And I think increasing their funding so they can continue to hire and get the staffing that they need in a timely manner is going to be really, really important.
No, that's really important, and I think it is. It's just the ruling by, or at least Supreme Court finding happened at the same time that they're doing the ruling of CIRCIA. So talk about timing. Timing is everything on that. So we'll see how that plays out.
One quick thing with CIRCIA I want to add too is after 9/11. We stood up the joint terrorism task forces all over the country, right? And the whole failure of 9/11 was a failure of information sharing. And we have become extremely good in this country about information sharing since then on a federal, state, local level. And that really was the genesis for CIRCIA, is to get the information out there. Who are the bad actors? What are they using to attack you? What's their malware? And where are they? And get back to them. And get it back out to everybody so they can patch their systems, fix their systems, harden their systems in a timely manner. And that's basically what we did with the JTTFs. And so that's why I'm very hopeful that CIRCIA can work once it gets up and running if you don't have agencies like SEC mucking up the works too much.
Absolutely. And recently you've had some big incidents, whether CrowdStrike, Microsoft. Any thoughts on that in terms of almost too big to fail, but in the software environment?
Yeah. Well, I work at a group now with my 3 former chiefs called Hill East Group, and we have a lot of cyber clients, so we're very familiar with this area. And I think you got to take a look at what caused it, and do a good forensic and honest analysis of take away the company. Okay, how did this happen? Okay, exactly. Why did it happen, right? And forget about the companies and whether they're huge and the big players. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, because a lot of healthcare, small companies we've never heard of, but they're holding 90% of people's data.
Correct. And so how did it happen, and how to make sure it doesn't happen again? And that's really my goal with doing a forensic analysis a la CIRCIA with CrowdStrike and with Microsoft.
And harmonization. So do you think, you mentioned SEC regulations and approaches, CIRCIA, and you can multiply that by many orders of effect. You've got TSA with pipelines and
Department of
so
Energy,
many
everybody.
others. DOE, exactly. But harmonizing, that seems to be on top of everyone's mouths, but I've been hearing it for a long time.
I know, but it was the same thing that they tried to do after 9/11, right? And you don't harmonize, you fail. And that is the message. And it's not like CIRCIA is some kind of new, out of the left field idea. It's harmonization. And that's it. And so that's why we've got to be on the same page. That's why we've got to have more prescriptive legislation. And that's why we've got to really beef up, in my opinion, the cyber director role to kind of force all these agencies to play nice in the sandbox and to work better together.
And you mentioned ONDCP and have some pass-back authority in terms of budget, which it does have, but how to utilize
now I got
that.
You saying ONDCP.
Oh, yeah. No. I actually was using ONDCP as the example where they can use some of the budget pass-back authorities. Yeah, which I think we need to be moving toward, and I think those are all really, really valid points. But looking, do you think Congress can play a role? Because I think the judicial branch is going to assume an even greater role, and one of the concerns you have is it could be episodic. You're going to have precedent setting that the courts don't even agree on, defining policy going forward. Firstly, I think you mentioned the beefing up of congressional staff to be able to legislate in a more prescriptive way. The judicial branch is going to need the same. They're even leaner staff.
Oh, yeah.
So
the law firms are going to benefit because the law firms are going to test a lot of stuff that goes out of agencies. Now, but you know what?
They always do, right?
That's probably a good thing because these agencies have gotten a little bit too out of control. And so there's going to be a deluge of lawsuits. There's going to be a deluge of litigation testing these theories of these agencies. And as usual, I think you're going to have the Supreme Court sort it all out. And they will. It'll take a while, but they will.
And do you think that, do you see congressional staff? I mean, they have to staff up, though, don't they?
Yes. I mean, I think that there's a small murmur within Congress who says, well, we just need to pass legislation to reinstitute the Chevron doctrine. I don't think you're going to see that.
Yeah,
I just don't see it.
So
I do think that even when you even have the hardcore conservative hawks up there saying we're going to need more staff to deal with this, I think you're right.
And my, not to be trite in a soundbite, it shouldn't be a cigarette wrapped in asbestos. We don't want that to be the definition. It should be good policy and good laws. What about AI? That seems to be. It reminds me when you go back to where the cyber discussions really started in earnest, and you were on the Hill. sort of, whereas Mark Twain said history may not repeat itself, it tends to rhyme. It's rhyming pretty similarly in my head. What are your thoughts
Well,
there?
First of all, getting a handle on what it is.
Precisely what it is, exactly.
What is it?
Yeah.
And it's also the garbage in, garbage out, right? What is going into the AI systems, right? And that's where I think we can have a regulatory or legal impact, kind of creating standards about what goes into AI. I think is probably a very important thing. And then if you can get AI right, and it's right of Schumer to prioritize this so much, if you can get it right, it could be the way for agencies like CISA, which are otherwise overwhelmed, able to let them do their job by augmenting the value of CISA, of digesting information, large amounts of information. But let's not forget, there's a lot of things at AI that there's practical concerns, right? One of the practical concerns is the tremendous amount of energy it's going to take.
Absolutely.
A tremendous amount of hardening of our systems to make it work, right? That's going to be a lot.
And security of AI itself is going to be integral, because you're basically putting a lot of trust and confidence in that. And there's certain issues and disagree with me, that only someone who's sworn to the Constitution should be making.
Right.
I just don't feel comfortable.
Right. And think about all the ways the bad guys can use it, and what that's going to mean for the changing priorities and concerns with law enforcement nationwide, worldwide.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's going to be a huge thing. I mean, we can't even fathom how much the bad guys can exploit AI to their benefit, and bad actors militarily too. So there's a lot of concerns.
And they tend to be first movers in a lot of new technologies.
And you want a good example of that? Look at Iran, China, North Korea, and Russia. With respect to cyber attacks, they got groups in Eastern Europe and in Russia that are unbelievably good at cyber attacks. We're getting better at hardening our systems. We're not anywhere near as good as we should be. They're going to use AI to do the same stuff, and we're going to have to be responding and anticipating and getting better at it.
And to your point around AI, and it's still early on. I mean, legislating here, if we get too prescriptive, it could have all sorts of unintended consequences.
You're really going to need to get experts and listen to them and have them help you write good legislation.
So we're probably a couple of Congresses off before we get sweeping legislative type solutions. I've heard this year. I can't imagine that.
I can't imagine this year for anything.
Exactly.
You know, if we have
even a post office being named,
if we have a continuing resolution, it'll be miraculous. But you know, hope springs eternal in the new year. But I think that what could drive it prioritizing, unfortunately, is going to be cyber attacks and cyber incidents.
Absolutely.
And that's going to be part of the problem. We're going to have to react to some of it.
And that is often not the best way, because you're always looking through rear view mirrors. Not only do you get whacked, but you also are fixing what you saw, which isn't necessarily as comprehensive.
As we think this through, one thing I do think about though is, you know, Cyber Command can be a game changer in that regard. We can learn a lot from Cyber Command, because they're thinking not like a bad guy, but they're thinking, how can I use this in an offensive manner? So we could probably learn a lot from keeping our finger on the pulse of what they're doing with the offensive capabilities in the military for cyber. Probably.
And you're talking to the biggest advocate. We're never firing wall our way out of this alone. We need to look at it through that field that you mentioned, offensive, defense. You do need to see the whole field.
There's no doubt.
If all you got are even linebackers are meant to sort of apply pressure on the adversary, but if all you have is safety, you're never scoring.
No, you're
once in a blue moon.
You're right.
So and at best you break even.
Yep.
Speaking about change, so we now know it will be a new administration.
Yes.
However, November
would have thought that
breaks out. Exactly.
Witnessed a lot of history in the last few weeks.
True that. What and for transparency, you are part of a task force we stood up looking at priorities for the new administration, nonpartisan, same report shared to both teams. But what are some of your top of mind thoughts right now?
My top of mind thoughts are, if we do this report right, it can be invaluable, because I think people are starting to understand how complicated this issue is. And I think a lot of members of Congress are looking for a lifeline where they can get some sort of a roadmap of what it is, we need to do. And I keep harking back to 9/11, but it's the same thing. When the world is littered with blue ribbon commissions that make recommendations. Some of them work and some of them don't. Some of them a lot of them have great ideas. I think the 9/11 Commission is a gold standard for what it was able to accomplish, but that was born out of a necessity, and this is being born out of necessity. It's not some pie in the sky thing. It's like we have very serious issues. It's here.
Yeah.
Like, what troubles me is there's been so many probing attacks over the last month or two on emergency systems all over our country. We know who's doing it, and we know they're doing it in case there's an attack coming up. So we know the concerns that are going on with respect to cyber. So my hope is that this commission will give some roadmap of things. And I'll give you an example.
Shovel-ready, day one things that can be.
I'll give you a relatively small example, but a very serious one. I did this Foreign Fighters Task Force. There was a big concern about
that was an excellent.
American,
I remember that task.
Americans leaving here to go fight over in the Caliphate and vice versa. And we traveled all over the world and talked to everybody and got all kinds of good information. And I never forget, it was a Saturday evening, I think it was. And all of a sudden, they had horrific attacks in France by ISIS. A bunch of people were killed. It was awful.
Oh, yeah.
And Charlie Hebdo attacks, I think it was.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, I get a call from McCarthy, who was a majority leader at the time, or was he a majority leader? And then got a call from Mike McCall and everybody else, and they said, "Oh my God, we have everything we need to do to fix this right now." And we had like 50 recommendations, and the vast majority were made law. And so I'm hoping that our report has a similar impact, but not because of a tragedy, but because we're anticipating. There's a lot of really good meat and potatoes, basic ideas in there that are basically what we call in the legal parlance up on the Hill, base hits. Small bills, get them in there, keep getting the stuff done because it's going to make us stronger and more secure.
Oh, you get a bunch of singles and you still score, right?
Right. That was Billy Ball with the Yankees back in the day.
Exactly. And the truth is we need more of that. And actually, I like your foreign fight because there were also very specific steps that DOJ and the IC to be able to coordinate beforehand could take. That is a great point.
Yeah.
The one thing, and I always go back to 9/11 as well. I had the privilege of working for President Bush right after that, and it changed everything.
Of course it did.
But what makes cyber, I think, a little different, and you're the first to recognize that, is a lot of the information sharing needs were within the government agencies, within the alphabet soup in Washington, between federal, state,
almost
local,
all of us,
territorial, and tribal, with some of our international partners, Five Eyes all the way to bilats. But cyber really is about the private sector, right?
It is about the private sector, and that is a big twist, but it's the same basic concept, right? We got to get the information to the people who need it on the front lines so that they can make it actionable and build the protections into their systems.
And the last point I want to go to, just because it is going to be a strong theme in our study, and again, I'm not going to steal any thunder on that, but it's operational collaboration.
Absolutely.
So it's taking information sharing and translating that into verbs.
Right.
And any thoughts on JCDC there, Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative with CISA? I know there's some warts, but it's a good model.
It's a great model, and it's all about information sharing, and I think that is something.
JIADF South, you probably, when you were working counter drug, is another one.
All that stuff. And listen, anytime you can have something where you're collaborating and you're working together, it's always good. And of course, that's not taking place too much on Capitol Hill right now politically, but the country's screaming for it. And they scream for it because in every aspect of your life, there's give and take and there's exchange. There's business, your personal relationships, everything you do. And the only place that's not happening right now is on Capitol Hill. And that's why CIRCIA is a very important piece of legislation, because it's kind of going to force the private sector and the government to work together for the common good of protecting our systems. And that is what it's all about.
John, thank you for spending time with me today and us today. Thank you for being such a strong leader on these issues, and thank you for continuing to be a strong voice.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad to be part of McCrary. It's been fun.
Well, John, thank you.
I want to say one more thing, though.
Please.
Every time I think of Auburn, it kills me. The tie-dye football game back with Syracuse in 1987.
Same colors, though, right? Yeah. Which are the Islanders' colors, by the way.
Kicks a field goal to tie
not Rangers.
Syracuse could have been a national champion.
John, thank you. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Cyber Focus. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing. Your ratings and reviews help us reach more listeners. Drop us a line if you have any ideas in terms of topics, themes, or individuals you'd like for us to host. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and stay curious.